Okay, we're going to do a recap of what we did in class on February 1st, 2022. I'm going to go over some really simple ways to get your image to be black and white. So we'll start with a photograph. The first thing that we're going to do with any image that we're working with is to bump that up to 300 dpi and get it to the size that you want to work at. So I'll go over here to image size. It's already at 300. I'm going to make this a tad bit bigger. We'll say 10 by 15. For this image right here, we're going to do a simple one color halftone. When you're working with halftones, pretty much what you're doing is turning all of this gray into tiny black dots. The best way to do this is to use the image mode bitmap halftone filter. The first thing that I want to do though is to bump up the contrast. Halftones work a lot better in a little bit higher contrast image. So for that, I'm going to use curves. There's a handful of ways that you could do that. Go into brightness contrast. I'm going to use curves. I'm going to choose my little black eyedropper here, and I'm going to go to the spot in the image that I want to be the darkest, and I'll select that, and you can see everything changes in relation to that. I'm going to go over here to my white eyedropper, and I'm going to select something that I want to be white. So I'll pick the brightest spot in the sky. So now I've got a pretty high contrast image. And to get this into a halftone, I'll go up to image mode grayscale. It will not let you go straight from RGB to halftone or to bitmap. I'm going to discard all of the color information. Image mode bitmap. Okay, the first time that you use the bitmap option, it's going to be under diffusion dither. You're going to want to change that to halftone screen. Your input, since we made the image 300 dpi to start with, your output is automatically going to be set at 300 dpi. If you notice that this isn't 300, you skipped a step and you should bump that up to 300. I'm going to click OK. So right here, the angle, this is going to be how your dot pattern is laid out on the screen. The frequency is going to be how many dots and the size of the dots, and the shape is going to be the shape of the dots. I'm going to leave the shape at round, and for a black and white image, I usually work at 22.5. That prevents your dots from being at some sort of weird pattern. We'll change this later for a different task. The frequency, if I make this number really small, my dots are going to get quite large and I'm going to lose all of my image. If I make it too big, it's going to be too high of a resolution to screen print. I typically work somewhere between 23 and 30. We're just going to leave it at 25 for now, and we'll see how that turns out. The highest that your resolution can get on this is roughly your mesh count divided by 4.5. So if you're using something like a 158 mesh, it's going to be high 30s. The higher you make your resolution, the tougher it's going to be to clean your screen. Since we're using the facilities that we are with the water hose, I would go a little bit lower. So I'm going to say 25, and we'll say OK. Now when I zoom in, you can see that all of that gray has turned into black and white. You can still see the image. You can see that there are human beings down here. You can tell that there's buildings. So this would be, I'm going to change this back to grayscale. This would be the image that I would take down to the print lab, and I would make my transparency like this. So if you are trying to screen print a black and white photograph, something like that, or even a texture on top of some other sort of pop graphic, this is how you would get that. Okay, so that's the halftone. I'm going to go ahead and close this image, and I'll open up our next image and we'll go over something else. Okay, let's say that we've got a drawing in our sketchbook. This is just something that I found online, and what we're interested in is this black outline. Not really concerned with the gray. I could go in and fill this in later with the pen tool or with the paintbrush. I really am interested in the black outline. So once again, I'm going to make this the size that we need to make it. So I'm going to go over here to image size and bump this up to 300. I think 14 by 20 would be fantastic. Okay, so we've got the image the size that we want. Now I would probably go in and delete all of this text and stuff. You guys do not need for me to show you how to do that. What I want to do right now is just isolate the black outline. I'm going to do something really, this is the easiest way that you could do this, and go over here to adjustments and go to threshold. Once you go to threshold, it's going to give you this little slide scale. You can select more or less by moving the scale back and forth. Now you can see once I get right about here where this peak is, it starts to select a whole lot of stuff. So I'm going to leave it right on the other side of that peak, right about there. And we'll say OK. Now, you can see that I've lost some stuff inside of my books. So if I go back, I'm losing some of the books there. So you can go in and you can tweak this. Or if you have a drawing tablet, you could go in and you could fix some of that with your drawing tablet. Now, if you're concerned that some of these lines are a little bit thin, we would probably lose something like this when we were screen printing. Or if you just want to bump up the black lines for graphic purposes, I'll show you how to do that. I'm going to unlock this layer. Let's come over here to the magic wand tool, and what I want to do is select only the things that are black. So I'm going to leave contiguous off, and I'm going to come over here and I'm going to select something that's black. And we know the image is all black and white because we just did threshold. As soon as I select something that's black, you can see this is what happens. Everything that's black is selected. I'm going to right click now and say layer via cut. So now over here I've got white with the negative, which I don't need, and I've got my black layer. Now to bump these lines up, what I want to do is to apply a stroke to it. I'm going to right click, come up to blending options, and I'll go over here to stroke. And then you can see my color, I want to add black to it, and now I can move this back and forth with the slide scale and make it ridiculous or make it, pretty much non-existent. Probably somewhere around 1 or 2 is going to be plenty. This is the position is in the center now. You could also change that to the outside. That's going to make it a little bit fatter. So you can come in and tweak the settings right there until it gets to the point that you like it, and we'll say OK. Now if we want to see what this looks like before, we just come over here, turn effects off, turn effects on. Looks much better. Okay, so that is using threshold and stroke. You do not have to use the stroke. That's only if your lines are really thin. But threshold, I imagine you guys will be using that quite a bit. And now this makes a great key plate. I could come in here with the pen tool and fill it in with other colors on the other layers. Okay, I'm going to close this out. Say no. And now I will open up the next image that we worked on, which was this young man's face. Okay, now we could go back in and do a black and white halftone with something like this. I just showed you guys how to do that on the street scene. What I would rather show you is if we were going to do something in the vein of Shepard Fairey with the Obama Hope poster. I want to separate this into 3, maybe 4 colors with large color fields. I'll show you the way that I've always done it in the past, and then I'll show you the way that it was taught to me in class on Tuesday. What I would do, first thing, is to make this the size that I want. So I come over here to image size, make sure that we're working at 300, and I'm going to leave it at 10 by 15. We'll say OK. So now we've got this image. Now I could go in and bump this up, change the contrast, something like that, get the image to the point that you are happy before you start applying any of these filters. And then I would go into image adjustments and posterize. Now once you get to posterize, then you can move the slide scale 1 color, all the way up to 7, 8 colors. So this is how I would have done it in the past, and I probably would have been pretty happy with this right here, and I would say OK. And then this is really janky around the edges. I would not be happy with that. That's not the aesthetic that I would be going for. So I would probably come back in with the pen tool and I would clean this up, and I would pretty much redraw the image and just use this as a template to trace. There was another filter that was shown to me. If I come over here to filter, and I go to filter gallery, and it would be under the artistic, and it will be cutout. So you select cutout and then you say OK. Now you can start using some of this edge simplicity to tweak your graphic. This is a much better tool to use than what I have used in the past. I need to get a little bit better at using this. I encourage you guys to explore this tool. So we'll say OK. Now we're just gonna leave it right here, and we're gonna say we're happy. Once again, I'm not happy with these edges. I would use the pen tool and redraw this, but I do want to show you, if this is what I want it to print, how I would go about printing this. So you can see that we've got a light gray. I'm going to ignore this. I'm going to actually make that gray white, and I will use the paint bucket, and I'm going to get rid of that gray. So now we've got this light gray, we've got a medium gray, and we've got a dark gray. So this would be a 3-color print. How would I print this? I'm going to duplicate this layer. Okay. And I'm going to turn this off. I'm just going to use this as a reference point. So this first layer right here, my first layer down would be this light gray. What I want for this light gray, I want to print the light gray where every color is at. So I'm going to select light gray, and I use my paint bucket, and I'm going to color in everything. This and that. This would be my first color. The reason that I'm doing this is because if I only print light gray where the light gray's at, and then I try to print this medium gray where the medium gray's at, I will never get it lined up, and you'll get a little white line around here. So I want to print a base layer of light gray, and then we can print our other colors on top of this. So this is layer 1. And now we need layer 2, so I'll duplicate this again. Okay. And for layer 2, this will be on top of layer 1. I can delete this light gray, so I'm going to just paint bucket white on top of my light gray. And now I've got medium gray and dark gray. So my second layer will be the medium gray, and I want to print medium gray everywhere that medium gray and dark gray are at. So I'm going to repeat the exact same thing that I just did. I will select the medium gray, and I'm going to apply that to also to the dark gray layer. So now this is layer 2. And now I'm going to repeat the exact same process again. Unlock this layer. I'm just going to make this my final layer, and I'm going to delete the light gray and the medium gray, leaving only the dark gray color. To do that, I'll just paint bucket on light gray, and I will paint bucket on medium gray. This is my final layer. So if I had my paper, this is paper, first color, second color, and we'll see what that looks like by changing this to multiply, and third layer, and we'll see what that looks like by changing it to multiply. So first color, second color, third color. This is exactly how you would print any of those Shepard Fairey-esque posters, the WPA National Park posters. This is how that's done. I would encourage you guys to clean this up with the pen tool. Okay, I'm going to close this out, and I'm going to open up our next image that we looked at, which is this one here. Now for this, I want to print a CMYK print. I want to print this as a full color screen print. That's going to require me to use process inks, a process cyan, a process magenta, a process yellow, and a black. What a process ink is it's an ink that already has translucency to it, so it's not opaque. When cyan overlaps magenta, you're going to get a purpley color. When yellow overlaps cyan, you're going to get a green color, etc., etc. So I need to make 4 screens this size, 1 for cyan, 1 for magenta, 1 for yellow, and 1 for black. And we need to make those into halftones, and we need to switch the angles around so that they don't overlap one another. To know what those angles are in halftone, we will just go to Google, and I'm going to say CMYK screen print angles. And the first link right here will tell me exactly what I need to do. These are the angles that I use when I print. Magenta 75, black 45, etc., etc. So I'm going to come back to this. Once again, make your image the size that you need to make it. Image size 300, and I'm going to bump this up to something like 14 by 12. We'll say OK. And now I need to switch this over to CMYK. Make sure it's at CMYK mode, CMYK here, okay. So now I'm gonna make my life a little bit easier. This is fine. I'm gonna make a new canvas to work on because I'm going to be making my layer over here, and I'll just drag it over to my new canvas. There's a handful of ways to do this. This is how I find it to be a little bit easier. So once again, my size is 12 by roughly 15. I'm going to make a new canvas. by 15. And I'm going to pull this out. Okay, so I come back over to this layer here. I want to go to channels, and here you can see I've got cyan, magenta, yellow, black. We'll start with cyan, and our cyan angle is 15. So I come up to image mode, and now I can immediately go to my bitmap. I don't need to go to the grayscale thing like I showed you guys in the beginning. I say bitmap, discard other channels, okay. 300 halftone stream, that's great. We'll stick at 25, and now the angle is going to be 15 because we're only doing the cyan channel. We say okay, this is what we've got. Before I move this, if I were to try to drag this right now, it will not let me because it's a bitmap. I need to change this back to grayscale. There we go. And I'll drag this down, and I'm going to go ahead and put this in place. So this is my cyan channel, my cyan layer. I will name it as such. And now I'm going to go back to my original image, and I'll just jump back in history here to where I had CMYK, go back to channels, and now we're going to work on the magenta layer. The magenta angle is 75. I come up and I repeat that process once again. Image mode, bitmap, okay, okay, and 75. And I'm going to continue to drag my layers over, and I'll name them so that I don't get confused. Yellow will be the last one, 0, and our black is going to be 45, so we'll remember that. Go to black, and last color, bitmap, okay, okay, and we'll make this at 45. Now, if you search around online, you're going to find other printmakers that use different angles. They work totally fine. The important thing is they need to be a certain distance apart from one another, and they cannot be the same, or they will overlap and your image will not turn out correctly. We'll say okay, and go ahead and make this grayscale. And now I'm going to work on this image here. So this is my black. I can leave this at black, and if I zoom in, you can see that this is all black and white dots. There's no grays in this, it's white and black. Come over here to layers. This is black. And now I'm going to turn I'm going to change my layer property to multiply so that I can see through it. And I'm going to turn this off. I'm going to go down to my yellow layer. Okay, and I want to get this lined up properly. Snaps to the corner. I zoom in. I want to go ahead and make this yellow. So I come over here to yellow. Okay, now these are ready to print. These 4 transparencies are ready to print in the print lab. So I'm going to go ahead and put a little dot here, and I'll show you in a second how I would lay this out. I just want to see what the print is going to look like. You can skip this step if you trust yourself. I always like to go ahead and test it. So yellow, and I'm going to paint bucket all of the yellow into the black here. I'll change my layer properties to multiply, and I'm going to turn this off. Magenta, do the exact same thing. 0. We'll make this 100. There's my magenta layer. Change this to multiply. Turn this off. And now the same thing for cyan. So I'm going to zoom into my cyan layer here. Put that down. Okay, now if this is my piece of paper, we'll say we can print cyan first. We'll come in and we'll print magenta second. We'll print yellow on top of that, and then we'll print black on top of that. And our black is a little bit off. And you can see that I messed this bottom part up here, so we'll ignore that. We want to make sure our registration is correct. If you're going to do something like this, you probably want to have your canvas be a little bit larger than what it is, and have a registration mark, a little X, a little circle with a target in it, something like that, and then you can crop that off later. And I would have to go back in and fix my black here. I think I actually cropped it out, but you understand what I'm doing. Okay, so now if I want to print all of these transparencies, if I come back to where I'm at right here, what I would do would be to make the canvas size 4 times this large. We'll go to canvas size. I'm going to put this down in the corner, and we'll say height 24, and we'll say width 30. And now I can just move all of these, and this is what I would take to the print lab, and I would print this on a transparency, and then I could just cut this in half. You may want to leave, you know, 1/8 of an inch, 1/4 of an inch in between, so that you don't have to be as precise when you're cutting with your X-Acto blade. But all of this is 100% black and white. That's the important thing. This would be perfect for making screens. The only other thing that we talked about during class was the mezzotint filter. So I'll show you on this image how I would do a mezzotint. First, I'm going to make this a grayscale image. Now if I have this and I wanted to do a black and white halftone of it, just tiny black dots, that's it, not color. We could do the halftone, we could do halftone like I showed you guys before with a 22.5 angle. Sometimes that looks a little bit too computer generated for whatever your image style is going for. So if I wanted to do something a little bit different, if I wanted to look like I was stippling with a micron pen, I could come over here to filter and go to pixelate and go to mezzotint. Mezzotint will make everything 100% black and white. Your screen will not be able to handle the fine, possibly the medium. I would suggest go for the grainy dots, and you can say grainy dots, and you're going to get a little preview up here. We'll say okay. Now this is what that would look like. So this would be 15. If I were to zoom this up, you know, this is something like print size on my laptop. It does give you, it does turn your background into a shade. So there are ways that you could avoid that in the beginning, either by cutting it out and having it be its own layer, or you could just go in and delete that stuff later if it bothers you. But you can see now this is 100% black and white, but it looks a little bit softer, a little bit less computer generated. So this is another way that I typically use to make my images. Hopefully this was helpful. I'll see you guys on Tuesday.